Namaste. My name is Saurabh Nanda, and this is another episode of Such Conversations Matter. Well, today's guest is Mr. Robinder Sachdev. He's an international relations expert from India. And he is an expert on India US relations, some countries in the Middle East, India Japan, India Korea, and some countries in Western Europe. He's appeared more than 3,000 times in international media, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Asahi Shimbun in Japan. And you can watch him almost every third day on Z News, India TV, whenever they have debates about India US or India China relationships. On top of that, he does a lot of other things, a lot of social impact projects, and so on. I met him actually quite some time ago in 2013. I did this small module where I had to teach Indian English to his Japanese clients. And since then, I've been a great fan of his work. So he recently started his campaign of Live and Let Live, which he believes should be the mantra for foreign relations. So let's talk more about that and a lot of other questions that I have for him. And he's graciously agreed to, just be part of this interview. So, hi, Robinder, how are you?
Well, awesome, as good as you. Maybe we have the same storm, so all good. So, Robinder sir, I saw something very interesting in your profile when you shared with me the other day that you are also an engineer. So, yes, sir. Yeah. And yeah, being an engineer, I know every engineer in India has a very specific story how they got into engineering. So, I would love to know that story of yours. Mine is, I think, a general story. I did like, the science subjects, you could say, in my school. And, the only options which were on the horizon were normally either go into medicine or go into engineering. Those were the two. So engineering was there, but I enjoyed biology also. So, but never wrote any exams for the medicine, for medical studies. So engineering. So no big story in that. It was a regular story, I think. In those times, we never had many awareness of options out there. These were the only two probably, and the third was army. Yes, and also I was in Dehradun, so it was like getting into the navy, merchant navy. Merchant Navy. So sailor. So those were few, but yeah. Oh, that's great. So how did you transition from an engineer, a person who loves science, into international relations and becoming such an expert in so many different domains? I mean, see, okay, fine, fair enough. I always had a huge interest in foreign affairs or international relations. So I think reading a lot of newspapers, we never had anything else in our lives. No net, no television, no nothing. The only thing was the hard printed newspapers one could read to know what is happening in the world outside. So yes, I had a good amount of interest in foreign affairs or international affairs. And then I also had an interest in, communications, writing and stuff like that. And, even in my college, I was very active in so-called extracurricular activities. Okay, whatever debate, drama, dumb charades, those kind of mimes and stuff like that. So yeah, so it has been an interest, and I think what happened over a period of time is that I worked in engineering, I worked in hardcore software development. I used to write software, and I used to also teach software design, system analysis, and stuff like that, right? But then I ended up doing this kind of software design and analysis for a political client very early in my career. Okay, which was a professional thing for me, but it was a party, the Congress Party in India, for their some kind of databases and all. Okay, so that's how I got more into the intersection of software engineering, whatever you may say, and public affairs. Mm-hmm. But then I was always into software, and then I was in telecom. I worked in the telecom sector in the US, and I worked in the telecom sector, and then I had my own startup also in the telecom sector in the US. And but then in parallel to it, while doing my day job in the wireless industry, in the evenings, along with it, I started this startup, which was a wireless ISP. So that was there. In the evenings were a political action grouping, yes. The day job was engineering, you may say, or whatever, IT. In addition to it, kind of building a community, just kind of talking about US-India relations, where US and all. And in that, my earlier experiences with the Congress, with the BJP, I worked with the BJP also in 96 elections. Something, again, from a professional database consulting kind of point of view. So we started this organization to kind of develop on US-India relations. So, things started coming together. Plus, also, of course, when I went to the US, I did my master's in international affairs. Yes, very much. And I also did an MBA. So I think, so therefore, that all of those things kind of interconnected and came together. And that's why I am perhaps where I am now.
That's very interesting. And that is actually, there's a very curious observation here. So a lot of engineers, especially from India, well, we are, mass production producing engineers. A lot of engineers from India, they end up working in other sectors altogether. And most of those sectors, those sectors happen by chance to them. Right. So for you, it was international relations and, political software development. And you decided very consciously, okay, let me focus a little bit more in this and start developing a career over there. Do you think that's like, an inherent need for an engineer from India that, chalo yaar, let's do engineering, but on the way somewhere we'll find something better and we'll just move towards that. Do you think that's an inherent need?
That's an interesting observation that you're making. Actually, I do think so. I think a lot of us who do our engineering look at it, okay, engineering to karni hi hai, right? It's like the nuts and bolts of life. It's a graduation kind of thing, right? Uske aage, ahead of that, yes, getting into hardcore engineering or related, or then, into other fields, especially management, and then in management, apparently, you will have an advantage if you have an undergrad in engineering, right? So I think those are the thoughts which are kind of inherent in a lot of us. Yes, that engineering though is a must, right? Though actually along with my engineering, I had also applied before the results came. I'd applied at Delhi University for a B. I think it would have been a BSc. I would have applied for a BSc. But then when I was just filling, because those times you don't know where you would get admission, right? So, but I got the results for my Pantnagar Regional College before any of that. So who knows? Yeah.
So another related question here, Robinder sir, about, so when we have this inherent need, like engineers, I consciously understand when I, moved away from my American software engineering job and jumped into this chaotic world of career consulting. So I consciously knew what I was doing. And do you think most of the engineers also realize this, that engineering is just the first step? We are going somewhere else. In India, it is just that engineering is so hallowed and it has so many inherent advantages of being called an engineer that it is important to do engineering first and then get wherever you want to.
Yeah, I very much do think so. Like you also, though at the same time, see, many folks, it depends how you plan your careers. You being a career consultant, this is exactly, I think, what you're looking at sometimes. A lot of folks kind of decide and say, they're pretty clear that they will continue into engineering, more or less, right? Then there are some who are pretty, wanderers, so to say, who may wander around, etc. So essentially it's, I think, further engineering or further management. Management areas also, I would say, remain in the same, are not this other kind that you're talking, getting into communications or international relations or some other, totally unrelated field, because management is still, you're managing engineering, let's say, right?
Right.
So so it is it's the other, the meandering ones, who discover whatever they do.
Great. So one question for this question set, and then we'll move to the next one. Being a career consultant, it's my job to tell parents and students, how they should design your career, as you rightly pointed out. So if somebody wants to get to the stage that you are at right now, an international relations expert, how should they plan their career if they are, let's say in high school in India right now, 10th, 11th? What should they do right now?
I mean, in that sense, the classical thing is that fair enough, be aware of the world, read. I mean, actually now there's a overload of information all around you. That's the irony. But anyway, read or, absorb information. Check out, make an information diet for yourself, right? If this is what you want to do, right? Through that information diet, learn more about the subject. Be curious.
Mm-hmm.
Second, maybe write more. Okay, whatever. And then, of course, getting into college, sure enough, if it's that classical thing, sure, pick up international affairs. Or rather, I would suggest pick up economics.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything kind of, on many things, economics bridges quantitative and qualitative.
True.
Right. And that is the key that you need in anything that, if I'm talking international relations or a lot of other things that we'll talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's or creativity or creative thinking. So so economics in your bachelor's, because and then maybe yes, for masters get into IR. Okay, that would be the academic thing. Apart from this, get involved with organizations, get involved with initiatives. Pick up a cause. In the world that you are interested in, start networking, create a movement, create a campaign around that. I mean, that's what I've done. So it's right. Also at times, because it's fun, you pick up something which is of passion to you, build a worldwide community on any age, and that gets you, key is to start working across cultures with people from different countries, different backgrounds. Understand them, and in the process discover your own self also. I mean, there's a bunch of things out there, but these could be some things that, if you're seriously looking at career in international relations or international affairs or these kind of areas, or even civil services, for your exams, or international business. I mean, all this IR is is away now from what international relations, I think, once upon a time people would think. Or it may still be there, but another way to international affairs is now, everything international business, geopolitics, it's all that, trade barriers, advantages, economic development.
That's an amazing insight, Robinder sir, and thank you so much for that, because it's a very unique insight which students don't get to understand. So my next question actually comes from something you said. You said study economics because it might form the cornerstone for your career journey into international relations as well. Now, in the modern world today, economists, or like today's economists, they are considered the modern world philosophers, because ideally we don't have those philosophers which we still read about in the early 19th century and all those people. But today's economists are considered philosophers. Do you think that's an appropriate distinction which is made for them? Do you think economists should be the philosophers?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I would actually disagree with that and agree with that. If you do your economics, okay, what is an economist? I would say an economist would be someone, there can be two kinds of economists. One would be that will go more into academia and research and all of that, okay, or in bureaucratic jobs. Fair enough, you can call them economists. But then a bunch of these people, let's say if they go, you do your bachelor's in economics and then you do your MBA, what are you? I mean, you will apply economics, right? Sometimes it may be said in some definition, oh, he or she is an economist, but otherwise you're not an economist. Okay, you are let's say, manager or entrepreneur or executive. So it depends which category of the people who've done studies in the economics, which category of the work profile are they in? Now, that being said, the philosophers, yes, so of this category, right, which is into academia, teaching, or research, or development and bureaucratic and international organizations, let's say those, right? Your economists with the World Bank, kind of a thing, right? That category of folks, I could say that yes, could be looked as philosophers also, because economics is, is the base of society, and where I maybe not disagree, but I'll remind you It's not that economics is the base now and philosophers of economics are out there. Who was Karl Marx? Marxism is entirely based on economics. Okay, the idea of the base and the superstructure. Marxism is the most scientific philosophy, right? It has not worked, or it has not been applied actually, or it has been applied by different people. But all of Marxism and the scientific understanding of Marxism is extremely useful, logically out there. But yes, now things are even more in our day-to-day living, political context. Of course, society is based upon economics. You need that, and you need philosophy.
Yes.
Okay? So that's where we are. But now, definitely, yes, economics everywhere is becoming more predominating. Even diplomacy. Diplomacy is this economic diplomacy. Okay. So I do economic diplomacy, right? Promoting economic relations. Different forms of diplomacy are emerging: cultural diplomacy, science diplomacy. We come to all of that, right? So economics is kind of getting involved in everything. Competition between nations, competition between supply chain, the economics of your supply chains, the economics of your wages. The wages, demand, supply. It's all out there. Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, so everything, we've kind of moved everything from, all the other aspects like cultural diplomacy. Peru is considers itself the gastronomical capital of the world. So they have food diplomacy. And we have kind of, shifted everything towards more about the monetary incentive.
I would just want to add one more thing in this overarching that I was saying that. Yes, but, there is a fallacy happening here. The fallacy happening is that, I think probably that's, again, goes back to economics and being philosophers. The fallacy which is happening is that society is not a market. So exactly. I'm not saying that, the role of society or of a nation, one should look at it as a market. No. Society is much more than a market. And that's where, your other philosophies and a lot other things come in. But what's happened is that the importance of this market for whatever the economics has been heightened. So I would say correspondingly, these areas must be heightened also. So I'm not saying, because that's a trend sometimes we are seeing, that everything is looked at from the prism of economics and as a market, which it should not be.
Exactly. So, and in fact, that is why a lot of people praise, Keynesian economics and all that. But that is great. That came from the early depression, the Great Depression, 1929. But the thing is that you cannot measure everything monetarily. And that's where my next question also comes in from, actually. So this is a question one of my friends asked me that you should definitely ask this question. Do you think that WTO is still relevant?
WTO is relevant still in the sense that even if a deconstruction of the WTO has to happen, it will start by saying, okay, let us kind of dissolve the WTO or whatever, right? So in that sense, it's important, right? That's one scenario. On the other hand, yes, WTO still is important. It is holding up some fabric of, agreements, even if they're being flouted. People are thinking at least before flouting them and after flouting them. They can use it to give signals to other countries, right? Like the US is imposing tariffs, which are not supposed to be there. If WTO wasn't there, none of these benchmarks would be there, right? In a theoretical world. None of these benchmarks would be there if the WTO was not there. So how would countries signal to each other? Right now, let's say WTO acts like a benchmark, right? If I want to express my unhappiness with you, or if I want to I change that benchmark, and in that arises a dispute, right? Because you say this, and then we go to the WTO.
So, but then, what do you do when the biggest nations which virtually control WTO, like the US, they impose really strong sanctions, officially and unofficially or indirectly, to smaller countries, developing countries like Mexico, that they threaten them that they'll kick you out of the trade agreement and the North Agreement trade agreement if you do not stop. Or like Mexico actually initiated a process where they didn't want to import the junk food which is produced in America. but the US just clearly stomped over them, told them that these are the other repercussions that you will suffer if you do anything of this sort. So, how does the WTO play its role over there when somebody is just literally dictating the terms?
No, the role the WTO plays at present is that it depends what terms are being dictated. Are those terms being dictated outside the WTO, let's say, standards which had been set for between those two countries? If I mean, if it's not related to that, then it's a free market, man. It's a free market. The US says, you know what, my beautiful producers of burgers need to sell. They are the best burgers in the world. And Mexico, that's a political trade-off. And Mexico, you need to buy these, and then I will give you these things. So small nations will have to kind of live with it. There is no other way. And countries are getting more and more aggressive in trying to demand what they want. Okay, this whole world, the behavior is changing of governments. The aggression is changing. So smaller nations will have to comply. There is no other way out. Okay, sure. Otherwise, sure, if WTO were empowered enough, sure, they can take the case to WTO, fight it out. If the big power loses, it may roll back. But if the big power loses, it may just simply ignore you, like what happened with Philippines. Philippines went to I think it's the Hague, the UN Convention on Laws of Seas, for the islands which China had occupied. Philippines won the case there, but China is still sitting, period. So those things will happen more and more. On sanctions, though, I will say there's another very important, if you're talking sanctions. The others are, let's say, these are, okay, see the sanctions like Iran is under, okay, or North Korea is under, or even Russia is under. What is the core of those sanctions which the US imposes? The fundamental core where they have the power pivot is the financial system, the SWIFT system, interbanking. Okay, so US says, okay, Russia, if you do this, I'll do this, I'll put you under, attack Crimea, you're under sanctions. What does that mean? What it means is that Russian organizations cannot use the interbanking world system to transfer their money, to buy or sell. So you come down on your knees. That's what's happening with Iran. That's what's happening with North Korea, right? So if you want to avoid the sanctions, the world has to have an alternative SWIFT system.
True. So I completely agree with that, and I think probably that's one of the checks that Russia has, and then it does other thing to empower itself. Now, talking about Iran, it's an interesting thing. There's for the past few years, there's been growing. Let's say, there's been growing sympathy towards Iran from the European Union. They want to do more and more trade with Iran because they consider the sanctions imposed on Iran of an unfair nature. Well, because of the geopolitics, which US is involved with the Middle East and so on. So even if you have other major nations in the play, like major economies of the world, Germany, France, Spain and Italy for that matter, if they are saying one thing, even then, because you're the biggest economy, if you do something, again, doesn't the WTO come into question again? Like, if everyone is just going to do their own thing, either you empower it or you just agree to the fact that we need a new WTO. Why is none of that happening? Why is the empowerment doesn't happen?
No, see, the WTO is not meant for these kind of, let's say, flux dynamics in the world. Okay, the WTO is meant and made for very specific bureaucratic, okay, for purposes of logistics, quantitative definitions. The WTO has no ability and no role to kind of, see what US is doing and why is it pressing the EU and all. That role is actually typically should be for the United Nations. Now, why the UN is not playing its role on those matters is another matter. But coming back to the WTO, but yes, within these, threats and sanctions being announced and all, within these, if some are flouting what the WTO, let's say, conventions are saying, between any two of the countries or any three of the countries, then yeah, sure, three, four of European countries and Iran could together approach the WTO and say that, guys, this is what the US is doing wrong. right? If that were to be so. So it's for these countries to then identify what is the matter that they can take to court.
So very interesting over there. So when it comes to individual countries, and individual countries have taken a lot of steps in that direction. So in the 60s, when the Middle East really realized, okay, our oil is really valuable, they started working towards OPEC, right? The organization called OPEC. And recently, we can see China trying to do the OBOR, One Belt One Road Initiative, or the RCEP, which is the extended version of ASEAN. Now, the thing is, if everyone starts making their own groups, is that a more beneficial picture, or it just adds to more chaos?
If you believe in free markets, you believe in entrepreneurship, then you believe in the fact that let ideas bloom. Let there be thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs. Let there be thousands and thousands of initiatives. Let there be thousands and thousands of networks and groupings. The better amongst them will maybe make partnerships or survive or compete. I mean, they will evolve, but you have more, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a very broad sense, I would say that. Uh, and each would, I mean, they'll be always trying to reach some kind of a dynamic equilibrium. When they realize that within the group they can achieve something, fine, let's see what maximum creativity can they innovate. I mean, idea should be that these networks or these clusters which are forming should be, should be innovating something, should be creating something. More technologies, more socio-economic models, more models of getting people out of poverty, more, better health among the fishermen of a coastal region, whatever be it, right? So if, let's say, some countries collaborate deeper in some areas, the better it is, I think.
Okay.
Now, what you're implying is that if they try and form such groupings, but kind of, exclusionary nature, that, okay, we'll not include some, it will be only us. Then to that, I would say that you see there'll be multiple such new enclaves which will emerge, which are emerging. Okay, so it'll be competition. It'll be there. I mean, it's okay. I think it's good. I would rather say it's good. It's a churn. It's good.
Okay, so that's a great insight, Robinder sir. So my question is basically yes. So more chaos gets to more innovation, and we find better solutions. Is there a formula which nations can follow to make a cluster which is, let's say, which will have a longer shelf life and which will be beneficial more or less equally to everyone involved, all the stakeholders, inside and outside?
It depends. There have been such. You mean groupings of nations,
True.
Right? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Sure. See, there can be layers to it. One can be, yes, there should be grouping of nations which are neighbors to each other, right? So in that case, like let's say SAARC, whatever was, or the BIMSTEC are definitely, one platforms kind of a thing, which should create something. Then the next level is the regional level, and the next is, of course, the global level, right? So probably, I would say definitely yes. One has to be extremely or much stronger in your first neighborly, groupings, because those are geographic facts, right? Your logistics are close, somewhat, if not similar, not, but you understand each other culture, maybe, right, or business style. Informal trade is more between neighbors, right? A lot happening. So I think the first layer is to, kind of the regional block should be maximized without doubt amongst nations. Now, as examples of this, we could look somewhere in Europe, maybe if there were any grouping of nations, who kind of worked other than the EU. I mean, EU is a bigger one, right? I would say.
Oh, definitely. I think the Scandinavian nations or the Nordic nations, they have a very close trade and free movement agreement. Then the
Exactly.
Balkan states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, they are very close. Australia, New Zealand is a good example. Then Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia is a good example. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan is an amazing example.
I would not, I would not put Japan, South Korea, Taiwan in that model because they are all independent of each other. Japan is doing its own, beating its own drum. South Korea its own drum. But yeah, they're working with each other, but they're not like the cluster sense like the Lithuanians and or the Nordic, or Australia, New Zealand even.
Yeah.
Right. But yes, yeah. So right. So these are the different kinds of flavors or combinations which are out there. So I mean, that's a fair thing. They should be doing more. I would say they should do more and more.
So one interesting question arises over here. I mean, so this is not a new thing, collaborating together to have mutual development. But it has been seen in the history that such clusters, when they are formed in more developed societies or parts of the world, they are sustainable, they are long-standing. But when something like this happens, let's say we talked about SAARC a little, or let's talk about Africa or even South America. They tried making a lot of clusters over there, but they don't necessarily work that well as they work in these developed parts of the world. What do you think are the main challenges that developing countries face when trying to make such clusters?
I think the challenge which they face is the fact that they are developing countries, right? So each country has so much of challenges within itself, right? And has to modernize so many things, has to create so many standards of logistics, customs, technology, tracking, and all of that. You see that they are not at that stage of sophistication in a way, and neither are their neighbors. So their interoperability of standards, testing, certification, because see, a lot of this business trade and all requires standardization, certificates, testing, labs, which certify the product quality, the Chamber of Commerce is the origin certificate, whatever. So all of those things and systems have been smoothened out in the developed world, right? So within the country. So when a country now engages with another country, also which has its systems smoothened out and made out, then they can be quicker in harmony in terms of transactions. Whereas developing countries, we to upgrade so much of our own infrastructure, right? And I'm meaning even like IT platform for, let's say, whatever, the customs, for example, right, or logistics or such matters. And then our neighbors also, they're also not sophisticated that way that we can quickly this. So I think that's one big reason that the state of the infrastructure of the cluster countries. But in our case of India, for SAARC and all, the reasons have been totally political, nothing to do with those things. If we did not have these political challenges, I think, in fact, see, notwithstanding that your systems are different, you can still do so much of informal trade between each other, informal economy, not necessarily going through the channels, which would have generated or which could generate a lot of economic growth, right? In any case, half or a good percentage of the economy is in the unorganized sector in India, which we cannot even track. So India SAARC is, I think, a different kettle of fish. But then each grouping has its own flavor.
So you think that countries need to reach a certain level of development first, and only then they can, kind of aspire to, let's say, well, in a way, like it's like the Maslow's, hierarchy that if you want to get towards self-actualization, you need to first of all satisfy all your basic needs.
No, sure. I'm saying something slightly different, right? See, remember, I'm talking about the measured economy and the unmeasured, non-measured economy. So, nations which are developing can do a lot of trade among each other, but that would be a lot more in the unmeasured parts of it, right? Whereas for us to understand, either we learn to measure that unmeasured part, right? Or we grow the measured part. So what I'm saying is that, see, this measured part, I mean, at the end of the day, you'll say success of the grouping is what? Annual trade between India and Nepal was $100 million, okay? But what about the unmeasured trade, which was like, let's say, $500 million, right? So your metrics of checking or gauging the success, needs to factor that in. That's what I'm saying.
So why are economists not coming out of our country or developing countries in general who talk about the informal economy and create models to measure it? I mean, there has been certain success, even if you go from Amartya Sen to Mr. Banerjee now. They are talking about poverty alleviation, so they understand the various aspects surrounding it. But why hasn't there been, success towards this direction?
One, I think it's a very complicated or very, there are too many interlinkages in this whole, in this whole study area that we are talking. Okay, there are too many variables, and many of the variables are, of course, with the government and the government bureaucratic, movement and all. So I think your ability, what you need are maybe, see, economists, I would think that the ones who take an initiative maybe can make some breakthroughs. So probably more, probably so. What one way to answer it would be that probably not enough economists have been entrepreneurial in their thinking or approaches to bring what they want as solutions or push their solutions. So, or there's been a lack of communication, right? Or effectiveness of communication or the message to whosoever. I mean, so that means they've not conveyed, or maybe they've conveyed, and the leaders or the people who matter have not listened. So fair enough, that's there, but that doesn't mean that you don't try again and different channels or whatever. So be pushy. So probably, quote unquote, economists have not been pushy. That could be one, way to talk about it. Yeah, I mean, I would think that would be, to my mind, if you ask me, the bottom line would be this.
Right.
Not enough push. Sure that there is a pushback from the established systems and all, but then you have to build coalitions, build partnerships, and see that how you can bring change. Make partnerships with the media. I mean, for example, right, or whatever. Again, get your message out and show a roadmap. And then show a roadmap, and in that sense, I do very much like this randomized controlled trials, which Abhijit Banerjee, right? He is doing. That's a very nice, simple thing to show you guys. Okay, there is the control, and this is the intervention. See the change. So I'm a strong votary of that. I'm a strong votary of that practice of randomized controlled trials to show and bring. I mean, what one can. Yes.
Great. So, quickly moving on, Robinder, I think because every topic is so huge, we can have hours and hours discussion of it. I would like to talk to the other thing that you mentioned earlier, that the biggest world organization we know is the UN. So last year I was in Japan, and Horie-san, who was actually very instrumental in a lot of UN dealings, he was almost the Secretary General as well at one point. I asked him this question during lunch because that's the only time I could get access to him, and I asked him, "Sir, is the UN still relevant? Do we need the UN?" And he very calmly said, as if, this question has been asked to him a million times already. He very calmly said that, "I understand why you're asking this question, but if we don't have the UN, what else do we have? Because the countries need to come together at some platform and talk to each other. If we don't have the UN, there is nothing else existing." Do you believe in the same viewpoint, or do you think that we can do something about it?
No, I absolutely believe in it. I mean, the UN has to be. The UN has to be, and okay, what has to be of the UN is another matter. Much more has to change. We'll get into that. But the countries, the society, we need to kind of, we need to live and let live together. Okay. In fact, that's a huge global campaign that we are running. Live and let live. Okay. But separate. So all countries have to coexist. There has to be at least some notional idea of some recourse to something somewhere, even if it doesn't work. Right? It at least creates a psychological balance in the world that nations adhere to, at least, or the majority of them, right? And we are not in a complete lawless society, so to say, right? So United Nations has to absolutely exist. It has to change it has to change many things. That's another matter. It has to change its maybe even the mandates, because whatever mandates it has, no, not change. I mean, it has to bring truth to the mandates that it's supposed to serve, right? It has to change some of its working styles, maybe internal culture of the organization also, certainly. Maybe change some leadership also. Maybe it's become too bureaucratic also. Maybe some of it has become a self-serving, organization just to exist in order to exist kind of thing. So many of those things are there, but then on the other hand, there are many things like, it has to do, this whole thing which is happening in the world today, where is the United Nations? This, when else should the freaking United Nations, play a role other than the times we are in right now? So there's so many things the United Nations should be doing right now.
So very
However, the issue is,
interesting.
yes,
Yeah. Ravinder, very
yes,
interesting. You've talked about the right thing. I mean, this is the right tipping point. COVID-19 has provided us that tipping point the world was maybe waiting for, so that some change could happen. Do you think organizations like the WHO, WTO, UN, which were like formed like 80 years ago, do you think they can finally use this time to change themselves, demand for more teeth or powers, and get a lot of rogue world leaders into line? Do you think that's possible?
uh, yes, I think it is possible, but it will take some time. It will take some time. The nature of these organizations will change without doubt now. The consequence of the COVID thing and the consequence of what China is doing in the world today, right now.
Mm-hmm.
So the nature of these organizations will change because each of them has questions which are relevant to their area. Like for WTO, the whole issue of trade, right? For the UN actually and the UN Security Council, the whole issue of security. Okay. For WHO, the issue of health. The WHO will reform out of this crisis, right? But to what extent and all? So that change has to be brought or pushed. But these organizations will change. The UN, you see, the issue is China is, one big player which is creating a bunch of problems in the world today is China, man. And China is also on the UN Security Council. So the whole idea of how the UN will now revamp is going to be stuck.
Right.
Okay. So, in fact, the
Very
UN will
interesting.
become maybe more stuck now, because China will veto anything right now.
Yeah.
So, what the UN has to do is to kind of craft a role for itself in this whole crisis. It should absolutely immediately do it, I would say. The others would be impacted and would change, yes.
So, please entertain one of my fantasies here, Rovinder. So I've been for the last 2 weeks actually I've been thinking on these lines, and one thing that comes to my mind, and I already believe in this a lot actually, that the world has enough money already. All right, we have enough resources, we have enough academic research, like proven scholarly academic research, to solve a lot of problems that the world has. The basic necessities of healthcare, food, and education, we have enough of that. Like throughout the world, we have enough of all of that. Don't you think there should be a central organization in the world which just says to every country, you give food, education, and healthcare of this particular standard to each of your citizens? We will give you the money. There is one central organization which guarantees, all these three things. So you have three central organizations. Do you think such a thing can be possible? Because that is what is the need of the hour.
Sure, interesting question. Fair enough. The challenge is, where will the central organization get the money from?
So let's say the Ministry of Health in India just says, this is my budget, and the rest is supplemented or whatever is from there, but the standards are met. Do you think it's possible using technology maybe or something?
It is possible using technology and using, let's say, mechanical thinking or systems thinking. Societies are human, and human are variables, right? So it will not work. It will not work. But in a systemic formula, definitely yes. See, the way it would work is that this could stimulate a discussion and newer thinking on how to make some reforms in whatever the president is happening. Right. See, sometimes you can pick up ideas, moonshots. You know that moonshot may or may not happen. But what that moonshot does or can do is that it shakes up the status quo, or it pushes or nudges or gives another direction. So this can be something, because then, again, messaging. Then, when you're talking to somebody who's a decision maker, who will say, "Nahi, yaar, this should not be." Then say, "Okay, fine. If it not be, then what can be?" Right? Yes. What can be? Okay, how? So that will shake the person into at least rethinking or refreshing the way they are doing what they're doing currently. So systems thinking can be a good, method to point out an ideal scenario, so to say, in a way, right? And ask people to work towards that roadmap at least, of
Right.
the outcomes.
Right. Great insight. So we're going to move the conversation slightly to like from individual countries to more, from big clusters that we're talking about of countries to individual countries now. Robinder, I'm sure in your career you have seen, a lot of things which you probably never expected. You were surprised by them. Do you think, is there any, instant that you can think of when some country's decision really surprised you? Has there been such an instant in your life which you're like, oh my God, what just happened? I didn't expect that.
Interesting. I would think, yeah, may have been. There may have been, when something happens or a country's decision. My God, what happened? Or probably I'll say no. Not surprised. I would say, yeah, interesting. Oh, cool, interesting. And I'll see maybe what, ramifications it has. But maybe not surprised that, oh, how could this? Oh, okay. Probably no, not that. Or if something comes to my mind, I'll let you know. But I'll think, as of now, I don't think,
So do you think
there have been many things?
Yeah.
There have been many things, but sure, they're surprising enough, but not wow.
Okay. So you think your research and enough knowledge gathering kind of help you again? Okay, this might happen. There's a chance. Maybe the probability is too low, but it might happen.
Yeah. I think and I would think that it's not only my where I'm now, but I think this has been somewhat me all along, always kind of. Whenever whatever I've seen, like let's say. India tested the Pokhran 2 in '98. US imposed sanctions on India. Okay, fine. Japan also imposed sanctions, by the way, right? Okay. 9/11, yes, 9/11 was one. But that was not something by the government, but something like a 9/11, and then of course a 26/11 in Bombay.
Right.
So such which hit close home. Because I was in the US when 9/11 happened. I used to live there. So it was like close home. And then when Bombay happened, I was in Bombay on that very day when the Mumbai attacks happened. Okay. In fact, I was at the Oberoi Hotel having a coffee at 6 p.m. and then came to the airport.
Oh my God.
And I think 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, the terrorists stuck out there. Anyway. But actions of nations, not much surprising, Yeah.
So, if nations, which are these big social systems that we're living with, they are kind of predictable. So if nations are predictable and all these think tanks get their money from that, economic think tanks and political think tanks, then with all this knowledge, why is there, so to put it simply, why is there a lack of decision making? With all this information available and people are predictable, and because people are predictable, right, you rightly said, now nations are predictable. When we can see this predictability, we know what's going to happen, then why is there this lack of decision making, of decisions which can impact, communities and societies at large? Why don't those decisions happen at the right time or when they're needed the most or something like that?
I think to a large extent, maybe it is not known what is going to happen. When maybe even if you say that nations are predictable or some things are predictable, no doubt, those are trend lines that you see in hindsight, right? You see, okay, this was happening, so this will continue. So on a macro, maybe, there may be a trend line, but what's happening in the micro, the day-to-day things, how they're interplaying with each other, right? I think that's something that you don't know. And see what is interacting or playing out with one another and what is the next emerging out of that, and then how next is iterating with that. Okay. So those micro, whatever is happening is different. And I think that's what is difficult to predict. And that's what I think economists, or as you're saying, think tanks and all who keep gathering the knowledge, they try and track. And that's what in a way is the field of, risk analysis or country risk. country risk, based upon which the debt firms make their debt ratings or whatever, etc. Right? So the risk profile of one kind. But on the other hand, as to what can be done, it has to be seen. Okay, fair enough. Then, in some context, it can be also seen as what is implementation. The governments, you may have schemes on paper which are great, but their implementation does not happen. Why does that not happen? That's a big one. But I'll give an example of something in the current sense of decision making. To my mind, let's say the COVID thing. Right now, the crisis happening in India. The government has been coming out with very clear numbers that we've done this many beds or we've transported these many migrant laborers from point A to point B, etc. Right? But at the same time, we see that a lot of what they're saying is not happening. I think why that happens is that the political masters give the orders that something should be done. The bureaucrats, exactly as you're saying, they gather the numbers, they gather the statistics. Now, the point is the statistics that they have with them may not be enough, are not enough. Okay, do they? I don't think they have statistics of how many slum dwellers, maybe. Fair enough, they would have some ideas of the RV and all. But many of these things are not on papers, are not known. So, but what bureaucrats have to do, they have to take a decision. So they look at the paper, what they have, and they say, okay, we have this much and we will do this. So that is the order that they pass down. Now, when that order goes down, whatever is as per the order is being implemented. But what I think happens is that the order does not have enough data about or knowledge about the unorganized, unknown, the masses who are in the dark. So they don't address that at all. But on their papers, then they are able to say, yes, we've done this. This scheme has been 90% successful. Right? So I think that's one big reason of this, incomplete implementation of whatever is designed. Other than the fact that the implementation of the organized sector initiative itself may not be efficient, may not itself happen to be seen. That's one drop. But a bigger drop is I see here. People and things which are just unaccounted for. For example, in this whole thing, what about the homeless or people who live on the streets? When demonetization happened, the government says, okay, everyone, do this, go there. What about the people on the streets? Millions. Where would they go? But since they were not in those files of what's to be, there was nothing as to what's to be done with them, maybe, right? I'll give you another example. What about, and pardon this, the sex workers who work in brothels? See, and many of them are kept in slave-like conditions. Right. It is known. So, supposing some worker had been working many years and all, and she wouldn't go, also she is building up money in her own room, in her own pocket. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 rupees. Because I'm just imagining they wouldn't be able to go to the bank. Right? In normal. Now, suddenly this demonetization happens. What happens to the money that she had saved up? And she has nothing else. And there might be, again, I would say probably millions of such souls in this country or anywhere in the world. So these are the things which are left out. So what governments or administration has to do is has to kind of, go out, get more information, more data, more basic data, at least raw data.
Why do you think? So why do you think we don't get this data? NGOs today are becoming more and more accountable. I'm not saying they're all accountable or they're good and transparent, but they gather a lot of data. So we have agencies which gather data. Why? And if we don't gather accurate data, how are we even going to think of achieving the SDGs goal by 2030? So why doesn't it happen?
Maybe the state is not, administration is not efficient enough. Okay. Maybe I think in India actually also we need bureaucratic reform. The IAS are a great service, but probably, we need more of the IAS officers. Maybe they should be more, they need more manpower. They cannot handle this bigger load. Look at the size of the country and how many IAS officers do we have total in the country? I don't know. It will be minuscule, right? So
it's in the early thousands,
Yeah, in the early thousands, maybe 5,000, 7,000, huh? Wow.
Around 25, 28.
I know. Okay, make it 50,000.
Yeah.
Okay, make it 100,000. Okay, and have them empowered or enabled. So I think that's one, because there is too much of workload, probably, I would think. And second, also maybe being not professional enough in our work ethics. Okay, not really, looking to do completely what's to be done, not just kind of glossing over, with, okay, fine, this number, that number, without being, honest and diligent on the data. Okay. So maybe we need to, show that. Okay. But these are kind of tactical or such issues, which should be there.
So, I mean, clearly there is this big disconnect between legislature and executive in that particular manner. I mean, fine. It looks very good in Delhi, but the moment it leaves the Delhi borders, it just goes haywire. What is India's image abroad? How do foreigners perceive India? How has it changed from, let's say, the 90s till now?
I would say it has changed. It has changed quite a lot. In the 90s and all, probably India was not known much till late 90s in a big picture sense, I would say. Other than, great land, ancient land of wisdom, Gandhiji, and some, philosophers out of India, those kind of things. And maybe a land of snake charmers and stuff like that. I think till the 90s it was something like that, It started changing after around 2000, I think, partly, and then a bit more. Then it started because India's economy also started picking up. So the world started taking notice of India a bit more. And the IT world also started growing. And due to Y2K, Indian IT got a good entry into the US.
Right.
And I mean, everything else in the IT industries, I think, was triggered by the Y2K. Convenience of being able to work across boundaries and remote help and stuff like that. So that added, the IT, so the image of IT and a good economy growing, that kind of started happening. In the earlier years, definitely before the 2000s, of course, India was seen much more as a socialist kind of a country. In the Russian camp, so to say, Soviet camp, non-aligned, carrying its own solo flag. Around 2000 onwards, I think it started changing to, a more open economy also. We had liberalization in 91 starting, so by 2000 it was more known little. So the image started changing from being, out in the boonies to something, okay, fine, an emerging country and a positive and a growth and these many youth population and potential of India, etc. And that kept growing nicely. The US-India deal, nuclear deal, brought India much closer to the US, and I mean the world noticed why the US had signed that deal with India. You see, so that changed India's image. That okay, the US felt that India is important enough to change or to waive off the sanctions, the nuclear sanctions that India had. So India started to.
I'm sorry, I'm cutting you short here because this is very interesting, and you were instrumental, one of the main people in getting the India-US deal on track, and US-India became very close at that time. Do you think we still enjoy the same closeness with the US, and do you think that India-US collaboration can stabilize the world today? Well, China is the main antagonist in this equation, but do you think an India-US closer alliance can stabilize the world in a better way today?
Fair enough. So we've jumped I think from 2009, 10 to 2020. Fair enough. US-India relations, broadly speaking, are growing, will keep growing. There's a lot of commonality of interests and commonality of facts. We've got a large Indian diaspora there living, and many of them are very closely connected with the families and in even their own business and professions back home in India. So that's a big, big bridge we have. English, speaking both countries. Large number of Indian students go to the US for higher studies, or at the undergrad level. So that's a huge number. American culture is something I think broadly people in India like. Okay, in a particular sense, at least Hollywood and all, even the communists or lefts in India would enjoy seeing Hollywood movies, American cultural products, or eating at a McDonald's kind of a thing. So, American fashion brand. So, that whole awareness being there. So, that's one sect overall, right? That will continue. On the strategic levels, yes, a partnership would continue. And due to this whole thing with China, I think a lot of things are now being accelerated or triggered, which otherwise India may not have gotten as closer to the US. We are closer, but when I say as closer, means much more coordination in defense and security and strategic, these things stance. So that is happening. So that's a different. We will continue to have differences also with the US. We will have, and that's natural. That's okay. We have differences on your trade matters, on matters of intellectual property, on matters of tariffs, on Harley Davidson, for example. Okay, so those we will have, and we'll keep pushing each other. There are some issues which are not resolved. GST has been taken away, and we are asking for it back, but no. So those things will continue because that's the inherent nature of when two systems work together. They have their own lobbies which they have to satisfy, figure out. America wants to protect its own farmers or producers or manufacturers or whatever, and we want to. So then it depends. So with the US that will continue. What will yes, please. What will change is the closeness in this space of strategic, more intelligence sharing and all, right? But at the same time, I don't know. I'll see there are a couple of things. One, US wants India very much in its camp, but US wants India as an ally in a sense, right? Like the UK was. But India doesn't want that. India wants to maybe be like a France with the US. Fine. Sometimes I'll go with you. Sometimes I have my own foreign policy. I have my own vision of how the world should look like. See, the UK went with the US and everything, how the world looks like, fair enough. UK never came out with any big vision of the world on its own, right? After, the Second World War. Right. Whereas France very often takes up a deep philosophical and, a very futuristic, a very different kind of a take on what is happening in the world or on any issue. So India, to a large extent, in our foreign policy, I always think will behave like France down the line with the US. So now, how beneficial can this alliance be for the world? I would think it can be very, 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 very beneficial than what India is bringing so far. And India has to bring some good things to the world. And in that, the US will partner because US thinks and wants democracy and free and open markets, or free spaces. Sorry, notionally at least. US has no qualms on going and installing dictators and killing world leaders. US has done all of that. Okay, maybe still be doing it, but at least they uphold the principles sometimes, or more times than others, of democracy and freedom, so to say. So India and US will work a lot more in tandem. Will have to, or in a sense, issues will come up on which US will have to take a decision and we will have to take a decision, and very often our decisions independently taken will be the same, right? Which will further bring us both together on a strategic thing. On trade and all, it will continue. H1 visas blocked and all. See, those are issues of within the US economy. We should understand. Okay, if we can take US to the WTO on that, let's take US to the WTO on that. No issues. Cool, fine. Let's see. But we should understand that nations have their own, interests. They would, because the world that we live in today, I think, is changed clearly, and that actually is, as I mentioned to you, a campaign on which we are pushing and working, is a campaign of live and let live. India, if it has to take world leadership, India has opportunity now to bring the global conversation and say to everyone the US and the UN and whoever, the guys, let us live and let live. What it means is that, especially also see in the aftermath of Corona, we have to live with nature, with environment. We have to let environment live. Okay? So we have to live and let the environment also live. Similarly, nations have to live and let live with each other. Fine, we can draw out each other's red lines, but once those red lines drawn, you do your, I do my own. Don't disturb me, I won't disturb you. That is what's going to happen. And the reason I say India should articulate this very, very strongly in the world is because our foreign policy so far has been, has been couched, and the ultimate pinnacle of that was a term in Hindi you might very well know, of course you will. Vasudev Kutumbakam. Vasudev Kutumbakam means, or in Sanskrit, right, that the world is a family. That's what, India goes around the world waving, guys, let's get together, solve the problem, we are a family. No, I think that's an ineffective strategy. Tell me, in a family, don't brothers kill each other? There have been cases. The children kill their parent, child kills a parent, whatever. So, family is not the right metaphor, I would say, or the right analogy. The world is not a family. We're in a family as a species. But our foreign policy should be live and let live. That's it. Okay? We all live, let live. No violence. We want peace. We want peace and happiness. Let us all live, let live. And that goes for animals. That goes for environment, waters, rivers, oceans, everything around us. So that India has to take forcefully. In fact, I've been talking about it and writing about it also, that should be, and if we say we want to be a wish guru, a thinker leader, philosopher leader, right? We have to bring some value to the world which will tie things together, give a fresh. Agreed, live and let live is an old cliche term and all. But people have to see it in its right power of the words, what it means. And if India brings that out more, that would be India's gift to the world, I would say, should be. And even now, let's say with the China, conflict that we are having, that's a different way. There we can say to China, live and let live, or else. So, Geo or Gene do, Varna. See, you have to live and let live. If you will not let me live, then I will do something. That's the instinct of life in me.
Right.
Okay. So, but at the same time, I think this messaging makes it, and if we can drill it down to the children of today, the key is here, and that's our full campaign. Actually, this is on the global level for world leaders to say and what India should do and all. But in terms of making it an actuality and making it happen, I would really, and I'm trying, and we are trying, is that this philosophy should go down to our children, which means in our education systems, these ideas should be introduced all across the world. All children all across the world should be compulsory taught a course every day. Man, it's a emergency of the species we are talking about. Okay, so half an hour every day or 1 hour a week or whatever, right from age 5 to age 15 for the child, and he cannot get his class 10 certificate unless he has a satisfactory grade in compulsory done these. And these will be experiential learnings on compassion, humanity, respect for diversity, those things. And when these children grow up, they will, less number of them, be prone towards hatred of the other, extremism. The advantage other of this is also at the schools when this is happening, this will reduce bullying in schools. Bullying is a huge problem now for children and the parents. Parents don't even know about it, right? So children will be kinder with each other probably, or less number of them will be more angry, so to say. And so that's one advantage at their formative years. And when they grow up, the world around them, they will make it a more peaceful world. And these things are happening in some countries already. Here in India, in Delhi, We have class on happiness in schools, right? In Denmark, the school systems there are, including courses on empathy as compulsory. In the UK, some school systems they're doing some courses on mindfulness for children. In the US, course on kindness is there. So all this mix, etc., for all children across the world. So that's a different reason, meaning it. But coming back to foreign policy, that in foreign policy, that's what nations have to live with each other, and India can take leadership. Whatever argument we have to make, we can make it under that umbrella.
Right. Well, that was amazing, Robinder sir, and it has been such a privilege to talk to you about these things. I think, a few decades ago, the language of diplomacy used to be French, but I think now the language has to be live and let live. Thank you so much for being on this interview. And there you go, viewers. If you have any questions to ask Robinder sir, please reach out to us in the comments. He's a very accessible person. He's reached such a place in his life, but he's still very humble and accessible. And well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful conversation. And yeah, absolutely welcome any questions from any of your viewers. Any follow-up thoughts or questions, more than happy to answer. And once again, been a pleasure to be with you, Saurabh. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much.